So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Do I just introduce myself and get running, Ria?
Absolutely,
Okay,
Prof. Johannes. Absolutely. I put your CV for those of you who don't know who you are. I put it further up and your URL
okay, cool.
so that they can just
All
scroll
right.
up to find out
Okay,
more about you.
okay,
Okay.
that's good. So it's
It's
actually very easy. If you want to know who I am, you Google for Johannes Cronje, and ever since Hansi died, I'm first. So, ladies and gentlemen, background to this is um, about quite a couple of years ago. Well, in fact, in the year 1999, about Professor Dewald Rode and I started talking about paradigms of research in the social sciences. That was very much because the IT guys, and I'm saying that because I know the IT department is here, that IT guys were in the process of letting people know that computer science is actually a social science. And I'm not going to trouble you with the reasoning behind the fact that, at any rate, informatics, business information systems, so on, is definitely a social science because it's about how do we get people to adopt this technology that we're making for them. And so in that field, they looked at Burrell and Morgan's 4 dimensions of social science research. And then I discovered that that was a very useful way. Yeah, please put some cameras on. It's always nice. I discovered that's a very useful way to tie your research questions into your research paradigms. And over the years, this thing has mushroomed and grown. And I also then discovered that it also makes a very useful way of, of guiding a thing that is called design research. In the design disciplines, we call it design research. I see DEFSA want to call it practice-based research, which we like doing. It's also sometimes called design-led research. In education, we tend to call it action research. In the IT field, we call it design science research because they happen to like to put the word science in. Some people even call it development research. Essentially, what it is about is building something and learning in the process of building that. And so you could even find that in art. And I used the example with Ria this morning about William Kentridge and his development for his exhibition, not his exhibition, for his decor for Mozart's Magic Flute. And it was called Kentridge's Flute. And I was very lucky. My wife was at that stage doing a master's degree with Joe Ratcliffe at Wits, and Kentridge came and talked to them about this new thing that he was beginning to develop. And he did the most magical things with an old-fashioned overhead projector, and he would tear pieces of paper and he'd put them on the projector and he'd animate them with his fingers. We were amazed at what this man could do. Um, but he took us through his whole thinking process. Then we actually went to see the flute. Now, those of you who know about opera will know you listen to an opera, you don't look at an opera. But this specific opera, because it was Kentridge, you looked at it. And then just after that, a book came out called The Flute. And so there was all this. And and it was all built around this artifact, which was the stage thing. So that made us really understand that building things is a form of research because the two are that interwoven. And it's only been for the past 4 or 5 years that in this country, design is recognized as a form of research. Creative output is recognized as a form of research. But there's a big fear of double dipping, and that's why this talk really started happening. That if you submit something for a doctorate and at the same time you submit it for a creative output, then they say, sorry, no, you must choose the one or the other. You can't do it for both, which I find strange because if you do a doctorate and you publish 6 academic papers out of it, you will get 6 pieces of subsidy for those 6 papers, and you'll also get the subsidy for your doctorate. So I don't quite know why they call the one uh, um, why they call the one, what am I saying here? Double dipping and the other not. Alatia, I see you have a hand up, or are you just waving?
No, I'm not just waving. Hello, everybody. That's
Hello, Alatia.
exactly what I was hoping that you would start this meeting with, is exactly that. So, for instance, I'm thinking back of Johannes and Des. You might remember our student Johan Boyens, who is now in Scotland. He had a full exhibition, and he was still back in the days when we had a 50-50 scenario at CPUT. So he had a full exhibition and he had a full dissertation. So for him to get both of those accredited as outputs, that's not double dipping. I mean, that's double the work. He should be applauded. People should be applauded for doing that, not saying that it's double dipping. That yeah, the rationale behind that doesn't wash with me. So I'm so happy you started with that.
Good. Can somebody please just WhatsApp me or just put in the chat box the URL for this meeting, the link for this meeting, because I'm being WhatsApped by people who are saying, where's the link for the meeting, so that I can just quickly cut and paste it to them. Yes, Alatia, thank you very much. That's exactly where I'm going with this, because in my discussions with Renee, who was the chairperson of the creative outputs, at least for the design disciplines, we had a long talk about this double dipping and how do you avoid the double dipping thing and so on. And I showed her my model and she really liked it very much. So let me just paste this in quickly. Paste, and let's see if it goes this time. All right, so there, I've done my duty towards Selema. Let's go on. So I want to take you through, and usually I do this by way of a workshop and I make you do it, but this time my time I think is a bit limited. Ria, how much time did you say I had?
We've got the full hour, so
okay.
I wanted to have time for discussions, and if people do have questions in between, would you mind answering them as they happen?
Yeah, I really would like it to be this way, because it is designed as an interactive thing. But I've done it so often to so many Vega people and CPUT people and so on, that I think it might be a bit dull if I just do the whole, if I do it in a slow way. So I'm going to run over it. So firstly, to position design research, or if you want to call it any of the other names that you want to call it, we need to look at where we put our research. And there are two questions that we ask for this kind of research. One is, does it contribute to our fundamental understanding? And this is very important for me in a design research thing. I need there to be, in the first paragraph of your proposal or your thesis or anywhere, in that first paragraph, you must say, this research tries to understand why this is happening. This research responds to this author who says, but we don't know why this. So there must be an understanding component to your research. And if I can use our example of Johan Boyens, Alatia, Johan was saying, what is the place of computer technology in intaglio printing? Now, those of you who know what intaglio printing is, I do, because I know nothing about printing, but I supervised the student who did. That's when you make a print, and it is in reverse, and you then, whatever you design is designed in reverse, and then you print it forward. And so, but you have no idea what it's going to look like before it's actually printed. But computer technology allows you to flip an image and you can see what it's going to look like. And so that's what we said. What value can a computer bring? But then also there's the opposite side of it. If you already know what it's going to look like because you flipped it with a computer, where's the art now? And Desiree, you know that you and I and Alatia have had lots of conversations about, if you get an artificial intelligence bot to write your article for you, then where's the intellectual property now? So, or where's the intellectual effort now? So those were the sort of questions that he grappled with. And I can't remember, because I don't read too much of my students' theses. I get the external examiners to do that. But there were those questions. So to be able to answer those questions, you have to do something. And you have to then have another question that you ask yourself, which is, does it produce usable results? So if Johan had done all sorts of things with a computer and said, but actually it doesn't matter. Then there wouldn't have been usable results. So those two questions are there. And now here's a little piece of advice for any of you researchers out there. Whenever you find two things, put them at right angles, because that gives you 4 blocks. You write 1 paragraph in each block, and you write an introduction and a conclusion, and there's your academic paper. So whenever you get two things, put them at right angles, and you get your 4 blocks. And so indeed, here we have them. Here's our research inspired by useful results. Does it get useful results? Bohr's study on the Bohr's research on the structure of the atom? No, there's no useful results out of that at this stage. Good, thank you so much. That's a good idea. If that happens, just mute all and I'll unmute myself and carry on. Yeah, you can see that we're getting into the rhythm of how to work with this technology. Something happens, the chairperson mutes all, speaker. Yes, here's a question.
Hey, Prof. J, how you doing, man?
Well, thanks, and you?
Don't mean to, let me turn on my camera so you're not sitting there lonely. Don't mean to mess with your flow.
Yeah.
With regard to Johan's case study that you're using,
Yeah.
could you give us a sense of whether the creative output led the research, and did that form the primary body of the work, or did the written word largely form the primary?
Can we take that sort of to the end in question time, discussion time, because then we can get Alatia to talk to that, because she was much more close to the thesis than I am. She is a printmaker, but the short answer to your question is sort of both. Okay, Alatia wants to answer it. Alatia, go for it.
Yes, I want to answer it because I've got load shedding at 6, and
okay.
it's such an interesting question, and you're absolutely right, because from a thinking point of view, I think Johan approached it definitely in both ways. He was such a deep thinker, and from the thinking came the practice, and so it was an iterative process from the practice to the thinking, and thinking to the practice. And it was almost a design-based research model where he did various iterations. And I think I was quite inexperienced at that time. So he did a huge amount of work, too much.
Yes, we did. We did
yes,
kill him off for that, yeah.
But it was definitely an iterative process. And I think it started off with him thinking about entropy.
Correct.
And how things die off. And from
Exactly.
that, then he got back into the printmaking. Just a quick response there to...
Thanks to Joe. Yeah. Thanks, Alatia. Yeah, that's correct. And as I go through the model, I will show you that. So that's where there's no considerations, where you don't worry about use. It's pure science research. That's Bohr's quadrant. On the other hand, there's the very high consideration of use, but very little consideration of understanding. And that's the sort of trial and error or research and development stuff, very much the type of thing that Edison did. I saw a beautiful program about Edison and how he invented the phonograph, not the telephone, the phonograph that became the record player. And really what he said to himself is, it would seem that if I take this needle and I let the needle scratch in cardboard, it makes a sound. But cardboard will break, so let me try something like aluminium. And then he put it in aluminium and it made a sound. Then he thought, but aluminium is too expensive. Let me try something like wax that I can then harden. And so he went through this iterative thinking process without going to the theory, just going straight from one practice to the other practice to the other practice. And that's Edison type of research, which we would really call development, R&D, rather than academic research. And then there's the interesting one here, which is where it doesn't contribute to our understanding and it doesn't produce usable results. And that is the quadrant of hydroxychloroquine. You will remember that when COVID first happened, we said, just use hydroxychloroquine. It probably will kill you, but it doesn't matter. So it's not useful and it's not scientific. There were no big trials done. There was no asking about the theoretical reason why it might work. There was nothing. And so it goes in there. That is the quadrant of myths and legends and urban legends and fairy tales and things that are just made up. That happens here. But that's not the wrong place to be it. Because, you see, this is often where we get our research problem. You say, somebody says that this is the result of that. So, good example, I couldn't believe it when I started as a professor of education in the Faculty of Education, and there was somebody there who out loud said, children who do not crawl are bad at mathematics. And I said, hang on, firstly, just tell me about children not crawling. He said, well, some children don't crawl. They skid along on their bums. So I said, okay, fine. Now, give me the large empirical study where they took lots of kids who skidded on their bums rather than crawl and did their mathematics. And then secondly, explain to me the underlying theory that connects the bum to the brain. Because unless you've given me both of those, you are not actually in this, at least you are in this quadrant. What we do with design research is this. And you will remember that Louis Pasteur was the first guy to come up with the idea of germ theory. Before that, the idea was that dirty air, that vapors in the air make us sick, or that things but there was no such idea that there were invisible particles that make us sick, and therefore it was considered germ theory because nobody had ever seen the germs. And so Pasteur said, let me have a hypothesis. There are germs. Let me also make the hypothesis that if I boil the milk or if I heat the milk just before it boils, I might kill the germs. And then the milk won't go sour. Let me try that empirically. And so that's what he did. So he took germ theory and then he took a practice and he connected the two. And that's what he did. And then they've got a vaccine needle there because, of course, from there, all sorts of other developments on how to kill germs was developed. So this is where we are when we do design research. The model that I'm going to talk to you about is going to fit exactly inside of this little quadrant. So because I'm going to show you a 4-quadrant model, but it's not this model with different colors. It goes inside Pasteur's quadrant. That's just what I wanted to show you. So this is a useful thing to start off when you're writing a paper on design research to explain why you're doing design research, is because you're trying to contribute to both fundamental understanding and usable results. And that is usually an iterative process. And so my model, and so you can just do that as we go along. I'm not going to ask you to give me feedback on this because then we'll take too long. My model rests on 4 words: explore, explain, develop, and describe. These words are terms. They are specific words that I made up. They do not mean explore, explain, develop, and describe. They mean explore, explain, develop, and describe in very, very specific contexts. And my suggestion is that if you develop your research proposal, you use those 4 words until you get to publication of proposal stage, until you get to doing your defense or something like that. Then you go back and you replace it with words that you like. But you have to use these words because they work inside my model. And you also have to use the questions that I'm going to talk about because they work inside my model. But you don't have to use them when it finally goes to the front. You then color it into your language when you get there. So I see Bruce has just joined us. Welcome, Bruce. And so I'll give you some examples of those 4 models. So here is where I could do research with the same thing. So my theme is WhatsApp as a teaching tool. That's my theme. Now look at this. I can do any of 4 things with exactly the same theme. And this is why it is important that you remember that your research theme and your research questions are not the same thing. And that's why I discourage people from having a research question as a thesis, having your thesis title in the form of a question, because your research should be bigger than your research question. So the aim here is to explore the communication patterns that emerge. Remember, when you explore, you always explore for patterns. or to explain students and lecturers' use of WhatsApp for teaching and learning. Why do they use it? Which is different than the patterns. Or to develop a strategy for emergency remote teaching using WhatsApp, which again is different. My topic is still teaching and learning with WhatsApp. Or then finally, to describe the types of messages that occur in a typical WhatsApp-based classes. Can you also see that you could possibly say to yourself, but I want to do all four of those things. I want to eventually come up with a strategy. But to do that, I need to explore the patterns. I need to explain why they use those patterns. I need to develop the strategy, and then I need to see whether that strategy is actually working by describing the types of messages that occur. So all four of those questions together in an iterative thing will give you a design study or a design research study. Am I going too fast? Because Ria, I know you've heard this before. Desiree, you've heard this before. Can I have some sort of show of hands, some sort of indication? Yes, Professor, go ahead. Or must I pause and wait for questions?
Go ahead, Prof.
Okay, go ahead, they say. All right. So those could be the four questions that one would ask, or the four, not four questions, four aims of your research. And then what one needs to do is look at what it is that you believe. And to do that, we can either be positivist, which is in box B, or we can be anti-positivist, which is in box A. So for those of you who want to learn a new word and to be able to use it in a full sentence, the word you're looking for here is epistemology. This is your epistemological point of departure. This is where what do you believe is the truth? Is the truth one fixed thing that you can get to, or is the truth a moving target that always depends? So is the answer to your research question going to be it depends, or is the answer to your research going to be yes, no? And that's a very valid type of question that you can ask, because you can do a design research study in which you say to yourself, does material A significantly outperform material B when I design this thing? And the answer can be yes or no. And I'm answering a question that Ria and I talked about right at the beginning. But what if your results are a monumental failure? Then you still write it up and you still get a thesis. Because if your research question is nylon better than silk for this? And your answer is no, then we know for which thing not to use nylon rather than silk. The question was asked of Edison when he got to filament number 2500, which did not make a light bulb. They said, but aren't you getting a bit despondent? And he said, well, you know what? I now know of 2500 filaments that do not make a light bulb. And I heard a very interesting discussion of cancer research recently, which was the fact that for many years, medical journals refused to publish studies that had negative results because they said, you're not helping, you're not moving science forward. But then people came back and said, yes, that works if you're doing surgery research. And if you say to people, if you cut this thing out, it doesn't heal the patient. So yeah, obviously. But when you come to cancer research, and you say, and you don't tell people, I've tried this chemical and it doesn't work, then doctors are going to use it again and again and again, and it's still not going to work. So if you try something and it doesn't work, you have a responsibility to go out there and say, I tried this and it doesn't work. Don't you go and try it. Or if you're going to try it, do something else. Now, I also explained to Ria with the first heart transplant, the patient died. Did they then stop? No, they learned so much of that the next patient lasted for 2 weeks. Did they then stop? No, they learned enough that the next patient lasted indefinitely. So it took them 2 mistakes and then they got it right. It's unfortunate for the 2 patients who died, but they would have died anyway. So let me not go to medical ethics here. Then we need to look at the next thing here. Are you going to be inside or outside of your research? In other words, are you a participant in this process or are you making it outside? Now, in design, we do we do the same. We can do either. we've got this whole concept of co-design, which is here. I'm inside my research. Or I could watch how my students are designing from a distance and say, what are the various things that they design this year and next year and next year and next year? And I'm doing this research developmentally year after year, but I remain outside of it. Is my attitude subjective or objective? Both of those are valid. Do I have many different truths? Because it's your truth, and we know that from art. It may be art for one person, and it may be a disaster for another person. So there are many different truths or one single truth, and are you anti-positivist or positivist? Now, what makes this thing of mine so clever is there are 5. So you can either be a little bit A or a little bit B, but you can never be both. You are either pregnant or you are not pregnant. You can't be a little bit pregnant. It's either or. And that's quite important because it helps you to take a stand. Then we look at the degree of abstraction that we're doing. Are you looking for concrete rules that you're going to put there? Or are you looking for abstract concepts, which means at the end of your research, nothing will change, but we'll know a little bit more about it. And I would say, Alatia, that with Johan Boyens, we were here. Nothing changes. We're still making regular intaglio printing because he didn't write a recipe for other people to go and do intaglio printing. He simply said, this is what happens. And then incremental change means I'm actually going to make something and I'm going to show that it is now better. So Alatia had a student many years ago, I think it was Alatia, who looked at pattern making and said traditionally, patterns are made in blocks. Again, I'm way out of my league. I don't know what I'm talking about, but this specific lady said, but if you're working for outsized people, their hands don't grow, their arms don't grow longer just because their tummies grow bigger. So it makes no sense. And so why don't we design it in a triangle? So she moved from a square block to a triangular block, and she found that she was better able to wrap cloth around people that way. So it was a little change. Alatia, you wanted to say something?
I had to laugh. I'm so happy I'm on mute. Yes, you're absolutely right with the second one with the pattern maker as well. But the big thing with Johan was he actually said that if you do this, then other people reading this can also do this. And therefore, they can avert mistakes by mirroring or anti-mirroring. And but the interesting thing with Johan and the printmaking is that when he went back to his practice and he started doing his prints again, he said to me, he clocked in and he said, you know what? I didn't follow my own good advice. I didn't do it on the computer first. So he just went ahead, Pasteur way, and he just did it.
Right.
But yeah, it's very interesting the discussion about practice-led or
In Johan's, it may be a bit of both, absolutely. And by the way, just for those of you who have been really upset about this line not being 90 degrees but 89, this is deliberate. When I did it, I saw that it was stuck and I thought, why not annoy the audience every time I do a presentation by having the line just wrong so that people keep on thinking, Professor, there's something wrong. And that's to explain to you that I do work from an anti-positivist epistemology most of the time. And so that brings us the 4 research paradigms in which we will be. So if we're going to be abstract and subjective, then we are here. If we are going to be abstract and objective, we are here. If we are subjective, but we're trying to make concrete rules, in other words, we're doing incremental improvements, that's over here. On the other hand, if we're going to say, actually, sorry, incremental improvements is this side. Yes, it works, so I'll do more of it. This is a rule. Does the rule work? Yes, do more of it. Or it doesn't work, don't do more of it. So that's this one. This one is it works. Why does it work? Under what circumstances? What's making this thing work for me and not for you? Why does it work for some people and not for other people? So if it's concrete, but you can't quite figure out why, then it's here. If it's concrete and you can definitely figure out why, then it's there. And the same this side. If it's abstract and you can't figure out why, then you're exploring. You're making a straw doll. You're doing lots of them and you're trying to see what about this one and that one and so on. This one, on the other hand, is where you build and test and build and test and build and test, and you find which ones work and which ones don't, which models are work and which models don't. So those are the 4. And now we can fit our 4. So here I'm bringing you back to that one, and I'm just showing you that we can now fit our 4 quadrants into that one there. And we now say to ourselves, so here we have it: explore, describe, explain, develop. And we've got concrete rules, abstract concepts. And now I add some research questions to it. And I've got 25 minutes left, so I can let you know that we will end in good time. We're not going to run out of time in the process. So when I have a very large piece of abstract art in my house, and it's really interesting for me when some of my more cretin friends, I don't even, actually they're more relatives than friends, I don't have many friends like that, but some of my relatives would walk in, they'd see the piece of art against the wall, and they'd say, it's abstract art. So the first thing they'd say is, what is that? Now that's what they're putting themselves on dicey terrain already. If they say, what is that supposed to be, then we go to the level of unfriend. And if they say, my grandchild could have done it, we go to the level of block. But so abstract concepts, the moment you deal with abstract concepts, the question that we ask is going to be what? So there it is. What you so this is a nice scientific example of an abstract. What is it? Well, you told me to do an abstract. There's an abstract, and the question we asked with an abstract would be what? Then the next one we would do is, when we have concrete rules, you tell your children you must be back home at 10 o'clock. First question your children will ask when you make a concrete rule: why must I be back at 10 o'clock? Answer: because I say so. But so for concrete rules, the question we ask is why. For abstract concepts, the question we ask is what. If it depends, then we ask ourselves, how can it be? On what does it? How is this possible? That's what we're asking ourselves. How can this happen at the same time of this? Please explain to me. How does this person survive in that desert? Explore, have a look. What's going around? Where do they get their food from? Where do they get their water from? Where do they get their subsistence from? I'm exploring to find out, how do they survive? And then how do they manage? Those are the sort of questions that I ask on this side when I explore or explain. On the other hand, when I say, why does this work? And I understand why it works. I say, well, then let me do more of it. Does this work? Yes. Why does it work? Does it work? No. Why does it not work? And then I can start fixing it up there. On the other hand, I get to, so let me go to the last question. On this side, it is when. And when here, and now I'm speaking specifically to the IT students because they'll understand, when is a statement of condition. When is the gate open and when is the gate closed? IT people understand that all the time. We've got noughts and ones, and we're simply asking, when is it naught? When is it one? This is not a statement of time. It's a statement of condition. So, when is it bedtime in Michael Jackson's house? When the big hand is on the little hand. So it's not a statement of time, it's a statement of condition. Right, so then we go on and we say to ourselves, let's go to the next one. So here are we're going right back to my, how these questions can work. What are the elements that make up something? How do those elements relate? How do the elements work? And why do they work that way? Why do some phenomena occur and why do they occur that way? When do they occur and what is the effect size of each? So if we're describing, when does this happen and what is the size when it happens? And I always use the example of a histogram. What you'd find here is a histogram. Histogram is those sort of tubes that you fill with a kettle and you fill it until somebody says when. And then you stop. Like when you drink tea, they say when, and you say when, and they stop. That's how you make a histogram. So what am I pouring into this tube? And when do I stop pouring? And then the end result will be a histogram. And then on the other hand, when I'm developing, why does it occur? And when do I make it happen? And so those are the questions that I make to do this. And now we're going to have a look at some examples. Back with my, we're going right back to my, I'm designing a set of lessons which will be exhibitable, if you wish, about using WhatsApp. So I can explore the communication patterns that emerge. What type of message do they send? How do these messages facilitate teaching and learning? Or explain, how do their messages facilitate teaching and learning? Why do some work and some not? When I develop, why do some work? Under what circumstances do they work? And under what circumstances do they not? Then describe the messages. When do they work? And what level of success has been achieved in each circumstance. And that's where you get those histograms. All right. So now that we've done the introduction bit, now we come to the meat, which is the design research cycle. And when we design, we have to explore, explain, develop, and describe what we're doing. The design research goes through all of those. So all the questions I gave you are questions that you will be asking. The interesting thing is that depends on what the primary aim of your research is where you're going to start. So if you're wanting to develop something, then you'll probably start by reading the documentation, what has already been done. And then you're going to build a prototype and see whether it works or not. And then you're going to do some theoretical embedding. You're going to take that literature that you read, bounce it against the exploration that you've done, and then try and explain why it works or not. And that will then give you the blueprint for which you can develop, at least the material from which you're going to develop your blueprint or your prototype or the first one that you've made. You're going to test that. Then you're going to describe the results of your test. And you're going to compare the results of your test with the literature, and you're exploring possibilities. What does work? What doesn't work? Then you drop down back into explaining again, saying, and so based on that, here is version 2 and version 3 and version 4. And then if you're Microsoft, you launch it onto the market, and then your people will debug it for you. And you don't have to have, if you're a real person like you and me, you do it until it works. But if you're a large company like Microsoft, you put it there and you call it the beta version, and people pay extra money because they want to do it, and they do their debugging for you. All right, so that's the design research cycle, and here is how Sue McKinney shows it. So she says you have the prototype, you have site visits, you have a lit review and concept validation. So you look at all sorts of other, and we know that from designers, you look at precedent studies. This is where you go and look at all the other, what have other people tried, what has worked for them, what hasn't. You do site visits, you do prototype 1, prototype 2, prototype 3, next prototype, whoops, I've gone ahead of myself. And then finally, you do the query where you actually test it out on the market. Now, can you see what's happening here? All these things. Now, what we did with Johan Boyens, all this was his exhibition. And then there's the final prototype, which we didn't exhibit. And there's your query. Now, all this stuff can actually go into a creative output thing, because it wasn't on the, at least, yeah, those can go into, because this is the one that we tested for the doctorate. So there's the doctorate. And there are all the other things that we could do. The other alternative is there's all these things are the doctorate, and at least all these, and there's the exhibition. So all this plus that is the doctorate. I learned nothing from the final product because it's the final product. So all this and that is the doctorate. This becomes the exhibition. As long as you make sure that you keep those two absolutely bulletproof apart in the writing up of your rationale of the statement. You've got to show what the wall is, because there will be a wall, but it's not, as the what do we call that thing? The evaluator, when I go on the NRF, at least the DOE panel, when we evaluate your creative outputs, I'm not going to be the one looking for where the wall is. I'm going to be the one looking for whether your wall is strong enough. So you just have to describe to me what that wall looks like. And so what we have then is this: design, test, learn, apply what you learned, design again, test it. Out of that test falls things that you learn, apply what you learned, and design it again, test again, and I don't have to do it all the time. But then look what happens. Design, 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 design becomes your product that can be your exhibition. Learn, 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 learn becomes your principles that can be your thesis. And there's your wall between the two. And so when you write your thesis, you will show this already in the thesis so that nobody is going to say to you, you are double dipping, because you're saying, this is what I want a thesis for, and this is what I will be able to sell. It's the same thing if you're an architect or something, you're designing a house or so. I can't give you a qualification for the fact that you designed a product. I can give you a qualification for the fact that you wrote up what you learned in the design of that product. So Ria, yes, fewer feedback loops or just a very much larger scope. And very often at master's level, we do a build and test, and we call those a design experiment, which means I only build one and I test it and I see if it works. And that's it. Particularly if it's a research master's where you've got coursework, and then you've got a little research project that you get given. You don't have time to do a lot of it. So out of all your coursework, you say, okay, look, my coursework tells me that the product that I'm wanting to design should have this and this and this and this. So let me put this and this and this and this into it. And now let's see whether it did actually make the product, yes or no. And that's it. So for a mini thesis, just one iteration, but then we call that a design experiment. Once you do more of that, you call that design research on a larger name. So then you could also argue this way. You have develop, which gives you your design output. That's if you use my explore, explain, describe thing. So you develop, you describe what you learned, you explore why it went the way it did, you explain why that happened, your explanation becomes the next development. You go develop, and there's your design output. You go explore, and there's your research output. But what I discovered then is, okay, and then let me show you Oberholzer. So Oberholzer in 2007 was a jewelry student under John Scottness, and she had to make a piece of jewelry for the Anglo Gold auditions competition. And she was looking for inspiration, as jewelry students do, and she found some straw, some grass lying on the ground. And she thought, what if I cast this straw in gold? Would that be interesting? And so she cast it in gold, and she found that it wasn't working because it just looked like straw that was shiny. And then she thought, well, what if so that's what she did. So it just looks like straw that is shiny. It was unpretty for her. So she thought, okay, well, let me do some more things. So she started drawing and she scribbled. And then she realized that she actually needed to work in a negative space. But then in this drawing, she discovered that actually it was very flat. And then she thought, let me twist it a little. And she started twisting it just to see if she could add value by adding literally a twist to her story. And so eventually that's what she came up with, which was the thing with which she won the Anglo Gold auditions. And you can see that she's now not showing the straw. She's actually highlighting the lines between the straw, and the negative space is what makes it interesting. But so what you could see from what we could see there is that there is an interesting, what I talked about, build, design, test. I found that actually the real research happens in the middle. So you don't learn during explore. You learn between describe and explore. You read the literature and you play with things, and in that way you learn. Mr. Patrick.
Yes, sorry, Prof.
Yeah.
I just wanted to find out how do you? I like the way that you have, explained, both the research component and also the the practical component. But then
Yes.
how do you arrive at the singular mark, perhaps for both is it a 50-50? I think Mo also asked about that.
Ah, I've got the answer for you. You can specify that. I actually had a student who did that. He drew a pie chart. He said, this thesis, I took so much time developing this thing, so much time doing the research, so much time writing it up. And he put this pie chart and he showed that 70% of his work went into the making. And so the external examiner then knows to examine 70% of the made product rather than the rest, because it's your thesis. Your thesis is your story of what you did. And you start by saying, you must give me a distinction because this is what I did. And then you tell us how you did and so on. Very often, I recommend to people that how you went about doing it, the whole doing process goes into your research method. You're using the ADDIE principle. I did this analysis, I did this type of development analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. The analysis and the evaluation, those two usually form part of the thesis. Literature survey up front and the build and test, the destructive testing at the end. The develop, design, implementation, that's probably the creative work that you did. So that they can be intermingled. Desiree says also helps to look at the rules of the institution. Absolutely. But again, you write that up as to what it is. It's very hard for an institution, particularly in this field. It's very hard for us. And I'm also speaking particularly because we're looking at, we want to pass the institution, but we also want to submit to the DOE for a creative output. So we must work according to our institution rules. We also have to look at the rules of the DOE. And so my message here really is, and how do we build that? How do we build that firewall? And my answer is we build a firewall by very clearly separating the design at the top and the learn at the bottom. And it's been very interesting to see how theses get written. There was one from a large institution in Johannesburg to which somebody in the room is closely connected that I will not mention by name, where I was asked to be an arbitrator because it was a design research. It was in your Faculty of Education. It was a design research where the candidate did 5 or 6 iterations of lessons and learnt about all of them and wrote it in a narrative form where she said, I started with these many people and this is what I learned. And then I continued with this and this is what I learned. And then I continued with this and this is what I learned, etc., etc., etc. Two international reviewers, examiners, both whom I know very, very well. The institution didn't know that I knew them when they asked me to be the arbitrator. And one South African that I didn't know from a bar of soap examined this thing. The two international guys said, give this thesis an international award. The one was from Australia, and he actually said what award they must send it in for. The other one is from the States, and he also said what reward they must send it for. The third guy said, please take this whole thing apart, put it back into a 5-format thesis with an introduction, a literature survey, etc., etc. The supervisor threw his cot out of the pram and said, if I do that, then the two people who were so enthusiastic, who said give it in for prizes, will take back their because it goes completely against what they're saying. So they sent it to me and they said, please just arbitrate. Do we throw away the South Africans' comments? And I read the South Africans' comments and I thought, no, you can't throw it away because actually he's the only one who read the thesis. And in his reading of the thesis, he says, but you telling us that you carried on with this doctorate from your master's, but never in the thesis did you tell us where the master's stopped and the thesis starts. So I don't know whether the first 3 chapters isn't just a repetition of the master's. And so he carried on. He gave very good insight. And my report went back to them saying, I'm not going to throw out this guy. I do agree with the supervisor that you can't change the structure of this thesis because in design research, very often we use a completely narrative structure, and Alatia will be able to show you that with her thesis as well. where the story is what the research is. You can't break that into a 5-part thesis because the story itself is the research. But then you've got to have a way of actually telling us that at the end, and crunching that. And that's why the last chapter is so important. And I'll show you some of those too. Okay, so that was, I think we may be at the end. Yes, I'm going to stop there, because this is when, if I go on here, I'll get you really confusing. Because, oh, I can just show you one thing here, which is how I would link that. You could link this. I did actually think I wanted to. Yeah, I wanted to just link these 4 quadrants to Peter Rowe's 4 design positions, because you'll find that interesting. If you are exploring, well, let's start with this one, functionalist. If you're developing, you're making something, you're in Peter Rowe's functionalist quadrant. Functionalist quadrant is where you build things, where you expose the function. So for those of you who know anything about the design, the Pompidou Center in Paris, where they've got the air conditioning and the lift and the elevators, everything runs outside the building so you can see them, so that you can see its function. Populist is where you're trying to understand why people like things the way they do. So we're talking Canal Walk, Century City, that sort of populist architecture is built on explaining. Exploratory research is for formalist architecture, like the Sydney Opera House, where you're trying to follow the form. Where does this form take me? And then conventionalist architecture is where the design describes what it has to be. A good example in South Africa is the NG Kerk in every town. As you drive in, the design shouts out, this is a Gerard Moerdijk style 1930s jelly mold NG Kerk. The design tells you. American state capitals, it tells you what it is. And so for that is the description. So I just wanted to show you how design research, what you're wanting to design will also tell you in what quadrant you'll be starting those cycles that you're doing. And so now I'm going to pause and stop. Well, I leave it on the sharing, but ask you guys to ask me some questions. Which dude do you mean Johan Boyens? So Mo says, often feels like shifting sands. Yeah, I think the problem is that very often we think that we've got shifting sands because we shift them. In your thesis, there's the part of your thesis called assumptions, and you're the one who states those assumptions up front. And if you don't stick to your assumptions, then yeah, you may be in trouble. I've got a thing here. I just want to copy the link again. I've got a present for you, which I'll put in the chat. Again, this is an article by Jan Harrington, Ron Oliver, and others that say, what does a proposal for design-based research look like? What should you write in your proposal? Practice-based research in art and design, UCT is doing some really interesting work there. CPUT is doing some interesting things there. And Alatia Chisholm specifically is somebody that you need to talk about in that field. I'm also going to give you another one, an article that I wrote myself, which you might like, which is called Designing Questions for Design Research. Let me just get to my articles. I'll give you that. That's this in this paper that I've just done with you, just done in, yeah, it's the article that I've just done, but in words. Let's go back. Okay, so let's go one back. Articles. There's a question, Desiree?
Well, maybe not a question, more than just a statement as to the question that Mo asked.
Yes.
Because I also think that if your research is, if your institution is kind of blocking you because of the way that you want to do your research, then it might be a good idea to take your research somewhere else where it is understood. Yeah. And I'm serious about that, because if we do have some we do have some institutions or people within institutions that are quite unbendable. And this is, you know, if you want your research to be meaningful, then go find the space where it will work, where it will work the way that you want to work.
Exactly.
Obviously, if it's totally out of sync, then you'll get that message too. But yeah.
Exactly.
And now, and probably they'll fire me now. So I'm looking for a job anyway.
No. It's what you're saying is absolutely correct, because no, why doesn't it want to give me this proposal? It keeps on giving me proposal. I'm trying to send you the other one. Let me just try and copy it hard. Sorry, get to this. More questions, people?
Maybe just a tip is, you've got to, when you try to sell the idea of practice-based research, or whatever we call it, is you've got to use the correct terminology in a way that the committees at the universities understand. And if you start to use action research, then say, oh, I understand this. Then it makes sense. Then you don't need to do anything else. You know, it's like, so the closer you can get, or to explain your methods. And that is maybe something that we can also look at next time, is maybe in the detail of the methodologies that we actually use.
Yeah. Too often people are vague on what they're wanting to do. And so in my own little instant research question generator, the online form that you fill in, it just says what you want to do and why do you want to do that. I also think that we're writing proposals that are way too long. It should be 2 pages where you simply say, this is what I want to do and this is why. So in the chat here, I've given you my article. You just type the DOI into Google Scholar and it'll give you the article. And then up at the top, I gave you Jan Harrington's How to Write a Proposal for Design Research. That'll help you a great deal. Those of you who are writing the last chapter, I've also got the structure for the last chapter, where you really write it up in a very specific way that will help you considerably. So let me quickly just go to my free online doctoral program. That is always a good place to go. Oh dear, just go there. Escape. And ever since Hansi died, I'm first. Let me just go there and fetch it. New page, Johannes Cronje. Okay, so here is my free online doctoral program. That's just all the advice that I give my students all the time. And all you have to do is go there, and then you'll find things. And the one I'm looking for is the thing called My Free Online Doctoral Program. And if you run through that, you get the table of contents. There it is, the bit called Writing It Up. And if you go to Writing It Up, what you'll find here is the chapters. And you start writing your thesis with chapter 4. Don't take your proposal and rewrite it in the past tense and think that's chapter 1. You write your chapter 1 after you know. Chapter 4 is where you write what you've done. So you write that first. Now, at last that you know what you've done, you then write chapter 2, which is the literature, because there's a whole lot of literature that you need to throw out because it was not relevant. By the time you did it, you found the literature is irrelevant. There's a whole lot of new literature that you've got to go and look for to support what you've done. So now only do you write chapter 4. Now that you know what you've done and what you've actually read about, now only can you write chapter 3. Because often you've actually got to go back to the literature to read, to legitimize what you did. I know how students work. I work the same way. You take a fat epistemological chance or methodological chance, and it works. And now you say, oh boy, but what is it that I did? And then you Google for what you did, and you get a writer that says, what you did is this. I did that once. It was a form of sampling. And I thought it was convenient sampling, and the the critical reviewer said, but how did you convenience sample? And tell me why. And so I Googled for convenient, and I discovered that what I did was not convenience sampling. It was called typical case sampling. But I didn't know that when I started. So if I'd written my methodology first, it wouldn't have worked because I wouldn't have known. And then comes Tjeerd Plomp's structure, the final chapter. And this you can really look for yourself. It is really, really cool how he sets it out, and Cronje added to it over time. And then only do you write chapter 1. That's the last thing that you write in your whole thesis. Andrew says a lot of practice-based research is done at problem statement. Yes, it can fall into any of your quadrants, Andrew, but don't fall into the trap of telling me that the problem is that we do not have a table. And so I'm going to have to do some research. And when I finish the research, I will have a table. If before you did something, you didn't have a table, and afterwards you did, that is not called research. That is called carpentry. So if you're wanting to develop a table, you have to say to yourself, all the tables that I've seen in restaurants outside tend to jump. People have tried to put little wheels on them that you can turn, but the problem is you then have to bend under to do it, etc., etc. But somehow or another, I find that some tables don't jump, and those are tables with 3 legs. Why do 3-legged tables not jump and 4-legged tables do? Theory, because 3-legged tables stand on a circle, and 3 points will always, you can always pull a circle through 3 points. So theoretically, a 3-legged table will always stand. Your design problem will now be, how do I put a square top on a triangular base? There's your design problem. So the problem that you don't have a table isn't there. The problem that the table jumps isn't there. The problem is, how do I assimilate? That is the job of a designer, is to put together 2 things that won't go together. That's what designers do. I tried to find, Bruce, you and I spoke about that many years ago. Can you remember what the right word was? We had a really elegant word for that. To reconcile. Yes, the purpose of design is to reconcile the irreconcilable. That's what we do. That's called problem solving. But you need to tell me what the problem needs to be, the underlying problem. So Andrew has said thank you. That makes me feel joy. Anything else? I think we're in injury time, so if anybody disappears, I'll understand. But I'm all enthusiastic and hyped up, so I might as well stay.
Maybe I have asked a question earlier in the last couple of seconds, is just a feeling, should we do this more often? Have conversations about research, design research, our postgraduate space, problems that we have, maybe sharing some interesting ideas. What do you guys say? Do we do it once a month next year? Some thumbs up, more thumbs up.
Salema says yes. Now, this is where it becomes really interesting, Ria, that maybe we're going to make this thing bigger than just one institution and so on. Because, I mean, Tuesday nights are my TERPS nights when I see all my students on a Tuesday night. So there's no reason why I just can't throw open my door on a Tuesday night and say, join us, make it even bigger. But on the other hand, I don't want to have a heavy hand in this, but what I'm saying is, if we make it a sort of a really wide open thing, my feeling has always been that very often these things become so small that there aren't enough people to make a boiling kettle out of it. Here we've got 35 people, but we've got 35 people because we've got DEFSA and UJ and CPUT design department and CPUT IT department. We had to have 4 distinct organizations just to have one working thing. So yes, please, let's do that.
Right. And Mo said a workshop would be awesome. Maybe that we can do at our DEFSA conference.
Yes. Where is the DEFSA conference this year, coming year?
To be decided.
Oh,
next
it's still
week.
TBD. Okay.
See somebody's hand is up.
Oh, there's a hand up.
It's Selema.
Selema,
Hi.
yes.
I thank you, Prof. and colleagues. I'm very happy that I joined. There's things that I understood differently that I now understand differently. It's always the case with Prof. It's like peeling the onion. I just wanted to say in the future, I would like to maybe have a discussion around this topic with 3 distinct levels of advice. For an example, at a preliminary, or let's say at a novice researcher level, which would be an advanced diploma / third year / postgraduate, and then intermediate, which is like a master's level, and then a PhD level. Because as I listen to Prof, he's moving across. He starts at first year and then he runs to PhD and then he comes back. And I'm not sure if everybody is catching that. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing it myself. So I would like to please, maybe in the future, as we discuss this, maybe we can try and reconcile these things. For an example, what I noticed is that the 4 quadrants, I've discussed this with Prof some other time. I would like to hear the other views, the views of the other people, and Prof maybe look at this from this angle of temperaments, where you look at the paradigms or the 4 quadrants and then associating them directly with temperaments. Because what I realize is one of the biggest hurdles, or something that creates a steep gradient of learning in research, it's emotions. And when you look at the quadrants, it separates the emotions. It tells you about extroverts and introverts, kind of, you know. When you look at the temperaments and you compare it with the quadrant, it's got abstract and concrete ideas. It falls right inside that, and it could be it could be something that could come up with maybe some theory or even an idea for novice researchers. Many
Selema,
novice researchers.
I'll give it to you for nothing. Alta van der Merwe and I discuss that quite often. There's your cholerics, there's your sanguines, there's your melancholies, and there's your phlegmatics.
Exactly, Prof. Exactly. And now if a student is not in their natural quadrant and they're novice researcher, they're going to have a very big turmoil of emotional turmoil in terms of getting people who they can agree with from a paradigm perspective vis-a-vis what they're trying to solve. So that for an advanced researcher would be just a mechanism. However, for a novice researcher, it's going to be serious emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, go and read the no significant difference phenomenon. It's not necessarily. Very often you can do research in a field that is not. I mean, your thesis and you do not have to have the same temperament. And in fact, my friend Cheryl Hodgkinson many years ago said to me, Johannes, you are the most unstructured person I know. So whenever you talk, have a structured set of notes. And you'll note that that's exactly what I did now. I took you through a structured thing because, as Selema pointed out, I will go all the way from doctoral level to primary school level in one quick go. But what I think, Selema, what you're talking about, which I believe in absolutely, is that if you are going to work in the described radical structural and power quadrant, that's going to be choleric research, and it's going to have the characteristics of choleric, and you have to deal with it. Whether you're melancholy or phlegmatic or so, doesn't matter. The research is in there, and it has to show those characteristics. Otherwise you don't have research integrity. Or research coherence, as it were. Okay, Jacobus, and then Mr. Patrick. Yeah. Jacobus is shy now. put his hand down and ran. Patrick?
Yes, Prof. Thanks again. I
Yeah.
just want you to once again clarify that issue of the double dipping. Really, I'm still concerned that it's still seen as double dipping when you extract some of your work and have it maybe have it for the creative outputs. Could you also elucidate on that point as
Okay.
well?
So there are a couple of instances where people get accused of double dipping, and the one I spoke about was the one that I had to be the arbitrator for, that the student took the research that she did for her master's and reported it as a chapter in her other thesis without demarcating it and saying, this is a summary of my master's. So it's effectively a literature review. But I have to put it to you, otherwise we can't go further because you won't understand what I'm on about. So read it, but this is not for marks, as it were. The other one that we're talking about is where you go to the government, to the Department of Education, when they give you subsidy for creative output, and you take the jewelry that you made for your doctorate and you say, I got a doctorate for making these jewels. Now give me a subsidy output for this. And the government says, no, 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 no. You already got subsidy for the doctorate. I can't give you subsidy for the jewels. But that's because you were stupid enough to say, I got a doctorate for making these jewels. If you say, I got a doctorate for investigating this and this and this and this and doing all that sort of stuff, and in that process, also these jewels came out. But subsequently, I've also realized that I need to attach these meanings to the jewels. Now, the jewels are no longer part of your doctorate because you're saying, I got the doctorate for the learning, not for the jewels. The jewels, and so you could even get to a point where, for instance, you make some jewels, exhibit them, draw the line, say, now I'm going to do my doctorate about how people enjoyed or didn't enjoy these jewels. Now you're not double dipping because you've separated the two. You've put the wall. It doesn't matter how and where you put the wall. It's that you put the wall. Now, Mr. Jacobus, we did hear you then, so maybe try again. A session on creative output by the Department of Education will definitely be worthwhile, and not having, you can have me there as their chief opponent, but you can't have me there talking about their rules, because whenever we are in meetings, I fight their rules. So I support them 100%, but my job is to challenge. Mr. Jacobus, try, if you unmute, let's try again. All right, so he doesn't want to talk to us no more. Oh, it's Mr. Doman, that's correct. So, Ria, I think we've now finally exhausted these people.
I agree. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining our first session. And thank you very much, Johannes, for sharing your wisdom with us. I think if there's a master supervisor in South Africa, you need to get that title.
Thank you very much. And yeah, please invite me when we do it again. Even if I'm just a member of the audience, I tend to be a very heavy member of an audience. But hey, you can always tell me to shut up or mute me. I know you know how to mute, so that's cool. Thanks, Bruce. Bruce says thank you. That was cool.
Thank you, everybody. And watch the space for the first date for next year. I think we can start in January. And we can put together a program with everybody's help and what everybody wants to talk about.
Sure, let's do that.
Thank you. Thank you,
Okay,
Prof.
everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.